Is power creep gonna kill Anime Last Stand? Well, at a glance, you might think that units like this and units like this have no place being in the same game together, right? Because there's just such a stark power difference, and literally it's like night and day using a current ALS unit with an old ALS unit. And although I've only been playing the game for like roughly a month, or a month, 3 weeks, give or take, I'm noticing a trend amongst a lot of the player base, and that is that either a new unit is too underpowered on release, in which case, you know, people aren't that hyped to get it, or I've never seen people complaining about a unit being too good, but it's definitely self-evident that at some point you start to think, okay, when is meta becoming too meta? Because let me put it into perspective, right? ALS has had more updates than I can keep count, and with every single consequent update, we get more and more units to play around with. And you know, the beginning units, the OG units, right? Like, I'll use Tatsumaki as an example. In her prime, you know, in her heyday, when she was initially in the game and she was the new strongest cool unit, her max damage with glitched, you know, glitch being the best trait in the game, the best damage trait in the game, her most damage that you could get was like 2 million, maybe 2.04 million, somewhere in that ballpark. You weren't even scratching the surface of what present day damage numbers look like in ALS. Like back then, if you had a glitched Tatsumaki, you were sitting at the pinnacle. You were chilling. You did not have to worry about anything at all, because at the time that was the best unit in the game. And I know that power creep in games, especially in anime tower defense games, it's a given. You're never going to escape power creep, because the way that devs keep their game fresh and exciting, and you know, the way that they pull in the player base that they have and keep it, is by outdoing themselves with each and every update. Maybe they don't outdo themselves in terms of work, you know, one update might take less work than the other, or another update might take more time, it might be more annoying to do because of bug fixing or testing out optimization, stuff like that. There's a whole slew of things that might cause an update to take more or less time. But one thing remains consistent in every single consequent update for, I'd argue this doesn't even just apply to ALS, this is literally for any anime tower defense game. The units get stronger, right? The farm units get richer, you know, farm units get better, they give you more money. Your damage units get stronger, they start doing more damage. Your newer units start having all these crazy passives, like I'll use the Gojo Unsealed that just got added in this update as an example. This dude has two abilities, one of which is a universal stun ability that you can spam pretty frequently as it only has a 30-second cooldown, and his second ability, which is just a big fat nuke ability that obliterates everything in its radius. Two very, very good abilities on a character that's already very, very good. You know, you can see where I'm going with this. It's an incredibly strong unit. So strong, in fact, that you might have to wonder, at what point do we consider strong to be too strong? And some people would say that this really started showing, or you know, this issue really started shining in the previous update, the Black Clover update, when they added Escanor or Pride the One, whatever you want to call him. He was the first godly unit ever introduced into the game, and he is obscenely overpowered. The best unit in the game without a doubt. Like, there really is no debating what the best unit in the game is. It is Escanor. Sure, he's more expensive than other units, and you can argue for the fact that, oh, you know, Escanor is not that good for beginners, or it's not that good for story, but, you know, pound for pound, damage for damage, Escanor is unrivaled. On top of that, he has a passive that makes your entire team do 20% more damage, which is also really, really good. So you can see how Escanor completely outshines every single other unit in this game. Albeit, there are some caveats here. He's a flame unit, so in Elemental Caverns, he's not going to be your go-to pick, but the fact that he gives your entire team a 20% damage buff means that you're going to include him in your team regardless of what the type advantage is, regardless of what the game mode is, because that 20% damage buff that you get for him literally just existing, for just having the unit on your team, is so invaluable that you'd be dumb not to equip him if you had him. And I know that it comes down to personal preference as to what you want to have on your team or not, but if you're a mid-max player, if you want to be metamancing, using the best, strongest units, everyone is going to use Escanor. There is no going around that. There's no debate around that. We all know Escanor is the best unit. Now, do I think that he is so strong that it's harmful for the game? No. And here's why I think that. Escanor is incredibly good, yes, but he's also by far the hardest unit to obtain. Because the way that you get Escanor, you have to go through two different evolution processes. Number one, you have to evolve Epic Escanor, which is the farm version of him. You have to get a 2% drop, which is his axe. You have to get that from the, what's it called, the Black Clover story mode maps. Those are already pretty hard, mind you. It's no easy feat to do those if you're a beginner player. Those enemies get pretty beefy. So you're already going to need to be pretty well situated in the game before you can even attempt to get Escanor. On top of that, if you're not farming the hardest difficulty, which is Purgatory, it is going to take you so long to obtain that Evo item, because if you're doing it on the easiest difficulty, it's like 0.5% drop chance, and if you do it on Purgatory, it's like 2%. So even on the hardest difficulty, this Evo item is still pretty hard to obtain. Not to mention, this is just what you need for step 1. We're not even scratching the surface of what you need to do to evolve this guy. After you get the Evo item, you know, you evolve your Escanor, you get him to his armored version, his like strong version, quote unquote. You still have a long way to go, because after that you have to evolve him into his godly version. And that is just a whole slew of godly trials. You have to evolve some units. You have to get 30,000 kills with Escanor. You have to obtain 500 Flame Essence. And that's not even all of it, because you have to craft a empty vial. You need to get a glyph of pride. You need to get an empty glyph thingy. All of those, which, like, all of the things that I'm talking about cost like 10 mythical shards, 5 mythical shards. They cost a bunch of shard materials, which are also in themselves pretty annoying to get, and you're going to need to grind the game to obtain those. So, yes, Escanor is incredibly overpowered, but he should be. He has every right to be. Because if the devs are going to lock the best character in the game behind a quest, it might as well be the hardest quest in the game. It's only logical that they make a unit that takes such a huge time investment to obtain. It only makes sense that he's incredibly good. I'm not going to complain about that. The same logic applies to the new Godly Sukuna. I'm not going to complain about the fact that he's really good. Now, it's debatable as to whether he's better than Escanor or not. I believe he's not. Don't quote me on that, but I don't think he's better than Escanor. He's a godly unit. He's going to be incredibly good. So, let me bring this back to what I was trying to say here. Is power creep going to ruin ALS? I think not. Reason for that is because we've seen this trend happen with every single anime tower defense game. With each update, the units get better and better and better and better, but the game doesn't die out. You know, players don't get bored when they see a bigger damage number. In fact, it's been a time-tested theory that this only encourages the player base. When they have new units to grind for, new strong, strong characters to use, it makes you feel like there's an incentive to actually play the game. Because if someone made an anime tower defense game and all the units did the same amount of damage, and the best units were like pretty mediocre and they never bothered to improve them or add stronger units, you wouldn't want to play that game, right? I wouldn't want to play that game. Do I think the power creep in ALS is going at a pretty rapid rate? Maybe a rate that could be alarming? Yes. Because we are jumping some pretty big damage numbers. Like nowadays, the meta for ALS, you need to have like 30, 20 damage minimum to even be considered usable. And if you don't have that, and you're not like a specific niche unit that you might need for a cavern or something, people just aren't going to bother to use them. There's so many old units that are just completely left behind in the dust because they're just not feasible to use anymore. They're not viable in endgame content because of how weak they are. They're not worth investing trait or technique shards into because even if you get a good trade on them, they're still going to be mediocre at best, and it's not worth investing the Evo materials it would take you to get these old units, because who cares? You know? So that's one aspect where I think power creep definitely harms a game, but, you know, like you guys heard my earlier argument, power creep more often than not, at least for anime tower defense games, is a good thing. And if it's not a good thing, you can at least agree on the fact that it's a necessary evil, right? Because if we never had power creep and we were just using the same boring units, or, you know, using the same damage numbers for every single update, it'd get pretty repetitive and monotonous pretty quick. So, you know, in order to bring this video to a close and summarize what I'm trying to say, is power creep gonna kill ALS? Absolutely not. Do I think maybe it's time to tone it down a teensy tiny bit? Yes, definitely yes. But the thing about these types of games is that if you already introduce an incredibly strong character, you're kind of setting yourself up to release even stronger characters the next update. Because people are already used to the norm of having a super overpowered unit, they're gonna want that same feeling in the next update. So when you update the game, only to be met with, you know, nothing out of the ordinary, nothing you haven't seen before, at least in terms of DPS, you the player aren't gonna be super duper incentivized to actually grind the game. But I digress, that's just my personal opinion. That's gonna wrap up the video. If you guys enjoyed it, like, sub, comment, stay tuned for more content, and we'll catch you in the next one.